Has there been anything that has really surprised you about the first week and a half or so of President Biden's administration?
Actually, in some ways, it's been kind of what was promised, which is a real kind of hit the ground running, very focused on domestic agenda, very much focused on reintegrating with political multilateralism, but economic focus very much at home, trying to get this COVID stimulus done. And I think even the reactions we've seen so far in terms of the bipartisan pushback to the 1.9 trillion, it's kind of so far so expected.
You are a current insider, Tony, and a former administration official. How exactly would you be tackling the first couple of weeks in office for any president? What are the type of things that they should be focusing on? And is the current Biden team focusing on the right ones?
It seems like it, Dominic. I mean, I think I'd be advising them to do pretty much what they're doing. They recognized that the biggest problem they have is not just the actions they're taking on COVID, which they are taking actions, but getting the unified focus on COVID. They know that the pandemic is the key for them to get through this first year, to show competence on it and show try to show a stark distinction with the previous administration, but also that unlocks this economy. There's been a lot of chatter about whether the 100 million vaccinations in 100 days is ambitious enough. If they carry it off, I think they're going to exceed it. And I think this economy is going to look very different when we get into this summer. Because of that, they're also going to earn marks from competence on it. They're also then focusing on the economic plan, economic support. This is the first time, I think, in a while that we really feel like, we have monetary policy support with their, Jay Powell's hands on the oars. Fiscal support is going to be there, and help on the health side. So there's a lot for this government to do. It's starting off an administration is pretty challenging, but they have a lot of experienced people, and they seem to be running right now.
All right, Tony, Stephanie, I want to add some more context to what we're talking about right now. President Biden is set to sign another executive order today, this time focused on the American manufacturing environment. Let's bring in now Kayla Tausche with more on what we can expect there. Good morning, Kayla.
Good morning, Dom. President Biden has signed more than 24 executive orders so far. Today is set to bring one more, tightening rules for domestic manufacturing where American government contracts are concerned. The administration says that it applies to some $600 billion in government business, refining what qualifies as American-made and reducing the number of exceptions made through waivers. It creates a new role at the Office of Management and Budget to oversee the effort, and a website where small businesses can scope out these contracts to see if they're better suited than the company that's currently bidding or has already won the contract. It's an issue that the Trump administration also targeted with executive action at least 3 times over the last 4 years. When asked how this action is different, Biden administration officials said it will close loopholes left open by the Trump orders, even as they raise the threshold of domestic content requirements. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, in a call with Biden on Friday, raised concerns about the impact of the new policies on bilateral trading and the intertwined supply chains between the two countries. Biden, according to the Foreign Affairs Minister, said only that there would be no unintended consequences between that relationship. Over the weekend, he also held calls with the leaders of Mexico, UK, and France, pledging cooperation, multilateral engagement. But, Dom, you also have to imagine they discussed a new travel ban, some new restrictions that Biden is going to reinstate starting today on travel into the United States from the UK, Europe, and Brazil, as well as non-U.S. citizens who recently traveled to South Africa.
So Kayla, can you break down for us? It feels like deja vu, even though I know that there's nuance here. But it seems as though the American Manufacturing Executive Order seems to further stuff that happened during the Trump administration. What else can we expect from the incoming or the new Biden administration that will be similar to what President Trump did during his final few months in office as well?
Well, I think a lot of the trade and manufacturing policy is going to be quite similar. One of the things you saw the Trump administration do on the way out specifically was to try to crack down even further on China, to put more companies on the entity list, threaten more action, because they knew that one thing that the Biden administration would not want to do from the outset was to appear weak on China and to immediately come into office and reverse some of these actions. To be sure, President Biden has said, and many of his economic officials have said, that the policy on on China was actually a pretty good move, and that reversing those tariffs was not going to happen right away, that it would be studied pretty closely. So I think a focus on domestic manufacturing, job creation here in the U.S., and perhaps tightening the screws on some adversaries overseas, a lot of that could be very similar, even as we see this approach to engaging allies in that effort quite different. Dom?
All right, Kayla Tausche with the latest there from the Biden administration. Thank you very much for that report. Now let's get back to our guests here. Stephanie and Tony, you heard Kayla's report just now. It seems like a no-brainer, Stephanie, that you would focus as President Biden on some of the wins that President Trump had, like on trade, like on China, like on big technology. What exactly will the Biden administration look like in terms of its policy decisions when it comes to things like trade?
I think this is where it's really important to distinguish between political multilateralism, which we've seen Biden already do quite a lot of, signing back up to the Paris Agreement, signing back up to the World Health Organization, those kinds of actions, engaging with allies. That's different to economic multilateralism, which Biden has kind of openly said that he's not really an economic multilateralist. He wants to sell this made in America domestic manufacturing creation agenda. What that means for trade policy, I think, is that well, the tone might feel different, right? We're not expecting to have sudden tweets with new tariffs come in. But for investors, that should create a slightly less volatile environment, but it doesn't mean a more positive U.S.-China trade environment. If anything, I think we'll continue to see tensions ratchet up and those non-tariff barriers continue to rise through this administration, maybe more so linked to things like human rights than to bilateral trade deficits. But the same kind of reality exists, which is that the U.S. and China are on a path of strategic rivalry, not strategic allyship. And I think that's not going to change for investors. And I think that is widely recognized. We just might have a slightly smoother path as opposed to the volatile kind of Twitter approach that we had for the last 4 years.
Tony, I wonder now, with your clients, what exactly are they asking you about? What type of volatility we could see, given what we've seen right now with regard to perhaps policy tip of hands, so to speak, in the Biden administration? Should we expect the same kind of volatility that we saw during the Trump administration?
No, we won't see those kinds of things. And to Stephanie's point, we won't be punching our allies in the face as we go about some of these policies. But as both Stephanie and Kayla both noted, a lot of the policies are very much the same. These Buy America provisions are going to be concerning to our allies, and so my clients don't like to see that. They don't like to see that this kind of sort of populist protectionism in policy, even though the tone is going to be very different. We're not going to see the volatility in how policies are made, where there's going to be a lot more process and expectation behind it. But the policy end game is going to be is not going to hew too far from the Trump administration on some of these big cross-border issues. But process makes people happier. They can plan for it. They can prepare for it. They know it's coming. They can provide information to try to mitigate the direction of some policies.
Now, Stephanie, really quickly here, just a couple moments left. What's the biggest risk you see in the next few months for the Biden administration?
I think the biggest challenge they've got to face is just the fact that, yes, there is a Democrat majority in the Senate, but it is narrow, right? They can't lose anybody. That means you have to have Joe Manchin on side and you have to have Bernie Sanders on side. And those are two politicians with very different views about how fiscal policy should go. Now, I think they'll get there. I think ultimately Joe Manchin will fall in line and you will ultimately get a COVID support bill and later in the year, another kind of net fiscal boost. But the process to get there might get a little bit ugly.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.